Welcome to Whispered Clues. Tonight, Sherlock Holmes faces the key that opened no door's riddle of silence, secrets, and impossible locks. Pour yourself something warm and let the mystery begin. The morning was still veiled in a slow, sullen fog that clung to Baker Street when our bell gave a brisk, metallic jangle. Holmes, who had been balancing a key between his fingers and turning it thoughtfully toward the firelight, looked up with the faintest smile. "Another summons to the curious," he murmured, "and just as I was pondering how this particular specimen manages to open nothing at all." Before I could inquire what he meant, Mrs. Hudson ushered in a gentleman whose manner was as precise as his attire. His coat bore a thin line of moisture from the fog, and he carried a small leather portfolio which he gripped as though it contained his soul. "I trust you are Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, removing his hat. "My name is Erasmus Fielding, solicitor, Chancery Lane. I have come on behalf of a client whose affairs have taken a turn both distressing and unaccountable." Holmes gestured to the chair opposite him. "Pray sit, Mr. Fielding. You interest me already. A man of law seldom uses the word unaccountable lightly." Fielding obeyed, laying the portfolio upon his knees. "You are acquainted, perhaps, with Sir Llewellyn Mordaunt of Claverton Square?" Holmes's eyes half closed. "The philanthropist with an unfortunate taste for Egyptian relics. Proceed." "My client is Sir Llewellyn's ward miss, Isabel Vane. 2 nights ago she received a package by special messenger. Inside was a single brass key of peculiar shape, wrapped in an unsigned note that read only, 'It opens nothing that exists.' She believed it a jest until, within 24 hours, her guardian was found dead in his study." The key had vanished. Holmes leaned forward, the faint gleam in his eye sharpening. Cause of death? Apparent heart failure, though the coroner found abrasions upon the wrist, as if from some narrow cord. There was no sign of entry. The door was locked from within. At this, Holmes rose and began pacing before the hearth. A locked room, a vanished key, and a message declaring its own futility. Admirable. He turned abruptly to Fielding. "What of the household?" "Only Miss Vane, the butler Cray, and a maid. Inspector Lestrade has taken statements, but he confesses himself baffled." Holmes finished with satisfaction. "Excellent. You have brought me the note?" Fielding opened his portfolio, but found it empty. A flicker of dismay crossed his face. "I placed it here myself." "It cannot," Holmes raised a hand. "Do not distress yourself. The fact of its disappearance is more enlightening than its presence might have been. Watson, your coat. We shall call upon Claverton Square before the fog retreats. There is something in that phrase. It opens nothing that exists, which suggests the author knows more of metaphysics than of locks. As we descended the stairs, I could not resist remarking, you seemed to know, even before Mr. Fielding spoke, that his key was useless." "How?" Holmes smiled slightly. "Observation, my dear fellow. His gloves bore the impressed outline of a key's wards, yet the dust upon them was unbroken. He had carried an object never once inserted into any lock. The cab wheels splashed through the wet streets as we set out toward Claverton Square. The gas lamps swam like dim moons in the fog, and Holmes, sunk in thought, murmured, 'A key that opens no door yet unlocks a death. Let us see, Watson, what chamber it was meant for.'" "What chamber it was meant for," Holmes finished, as the cab drew up before the dim outline of Claverton Square. The fog had thickened into a pale shroud, muffling the gas lamps and turning each into a floating orb. A constable loitered before a tall, dark house whose shutters were still drawn despite the hour. Inside, the air was close, scented faintly with cigar smoke and something more elusive old wood, varnish, perhaps the dry tang of anxiety itself. The butler, a gaunt fellow in black, opened the door and inclined his head with a kind of reluctant civility. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson," Fielding announced. "Inspector Lestrade is within." Holmes gave a small nod. "Lead the way, Mr. Cray. We shall not disturb the dust more than necessity dictates." The study was square and severe, its heavy curtains drawn halfway against the foglight. A massive desk stood before the fireplace, strewn with papers and an upturned inkpot, whose contents had bled like dark wine across a ledger. Sir Llewellyn Mordaunt himself sat slumped in a high-backed chair, his head tilted as if listening to something beyond hearing. The waxen pallor of his face betrayed the silent violence of death. Holmes stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes roving. Then he drew a deep breath. "Observe, Watson, the symmetry is deceptive. Death seldom arranges itself so neatly." Lestrade turned from where he had been examining a small cabinet. "Good morning, Mr. Holmes. Nasty business, this. Locked room, single key missing, and no signs of a struggle. You'll forgive me if I call it natural causes till proved otherwise." Holmes smiled faintly. "Your prudence does you credit, Inspector. Let us first be certain the room was indeed secure. The window bolts were intact, the door lock unbroken. A single brass escutcheon gleamed dully, but the keyhole was empty." Holmes stooped, examining the carpet with his lens, then rose to peer at a small mahogany box upon the mantel. A collection of foreign seals, Fielding supplied. Sir Llewellyn was an antiquarian by inclination. Holmes opened the box delicately. Inside were several signets, one oddly new among the old, its wax residue still soft. Curious. He impressed this within an hour of his death. "Lestrade, what time was the body discovered?" "9:30 last night." The maid heard a crash, tried the door, and found it locked. "When we forced entry this morning, the fire had burned low." Holmes bent to the hearth. "Yet the ashes are faintly scented with oil of cedar preservative used upon parchments." And here he pointed to a small, half-charred scrap of vellum. "Watson, do note the edge of gilt. A document destroyed deliberately and recently." "Could it have been a will?" I asked. "Possibly, or something one does not easily explain to heirs or solicitors." His gaze flicked toward Fielding, whose lips compressed involuntarily. "I assure you, Mr. Holmes, Sir Llewellyn's affairs were perfectly orderly." Holmes straightened. "I never doubted your industry, sir. Merely your information." He crossed to the desk and indicated the spilled ink. "Notice how it radiates outward from a single blatant accident of haste, not of clumsiness. And this penny freshly sharpened, yet no letter began. Whatever he wrote, he destroyed." Lestrade grunted. "And the key? Vanished, you say. But only a fool destroys what he means to conceal and keeps what might expose him. No, Inspector, someone took it after death, not before." At that moment, a faint movement caught our attention. A young woman stood in the doorway, a figure of quiet grace dressed in mourning grey, her eyes shadowed but calm. "Miss Vane," Fielding murmured, stepping forward. "Mr. Holmes, this is my client." Holmes bowed slightly. "You received the note with the key, I am told." "Yes," she said softly. "It arrived by hand. There was no name, only that strange sentence. I thought it nonsense until Sir Llewellyn was found." Her voice wavered, but she mastered it. Holmes regarded her steadily. "Did your guardian keep any private correspondence, letters he locked away?" She hesitated. There was a small cabinet he forbade anyone to touch, the one behind his desk. Holmes examined it. The cabinet's lock was intricate, old, its keyhole faintly scorched. He produced a fine wire from his pocket, manipulated it gently, and the mechanism clicked open. Inside lay several envelopes, and upon the lowest shelf a small wooden casket with a broken hinge. He lifted it out and examined its contents, a shard of glass, an old signet, and a folded sheet. Upon it, Faint traces of wax outlined where something round had once been pressed. "Holmes!" murmured. A seal broken, a trust perhaps betrayed. Lestrade leaned closer. "You mean blackmail?" Holmes replaced the objects carefully. "I mean that the hand that held the vanished key also held this paper at some earlier hour. It is the same dust, the same oil. The author of the note wished Sir Llewellyn to know the key's significance and its impossibility." Miss Vane looked bewildered. "Then what did it open?" Holmes smiled without mirth. "Nothing that exists, Miss Vane. But perhaps something that once did." The room fell silent save for the ticking of the mantel clock. Holmes pocketed the vellum scrap and gestured toward the body. "Watson, note the faint mark upon the wrist, not rope thread. A loop, fine enough to pass unseen, yet strong enough to throttle if drawn swiftly." Lestrade frowned. "Thread? You mean a garrote?" "No," Holmes said. "A string from a key tag. One perhaps torn off in haste. I suspect we shall find its mate soon enough." Miss Vane turned pale. "Then it was murder?" Holmes's tone softened. "It was designed, Miss Vane, whether deliberate or poetic. Time will tell. For now we require the messenger who delivered your parcel." Fielding interjected. "He gave no name, Mr. Holmes, and the clerk who received him remembers little." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Then we must inquire elsewhere. If a key opens no door, the mind that fashioned it means we look beyond doors. Perhaps he tapped the casket gently into what men choose to lock away within themselves." The fog outside pressed closer to the window pane as he spoke, and in the silence the faintest metallic click echoed from the hearth as though a dropped key turned itself in unseen hands. Holmes looked up sharply. "Watson, fetch your coat. I fancy the night will grow clearer at the locksmith's." "The night will grow clearer at the locksmith's," Holmes repeated, stepping briskly through the thickening fog as I followed close behind. The glow from a nearby lamp painted his profile in gold and shadow, his mind already racing ahead of our feet. We took a hansom toward Holborn, the horses' hooves clattering faintly in the mist. Holmes leaned back, fingers steepled. "Watson, you observed the scorch about the cabinet lock?" "Yes," I replied. "You think it was forced?" "Not forced, tested, as though someone sought to learn what metal resisted flame, the work of an amateur chemist perhaps, or of a locksmith obsessed with secrets." The cab turned into a narrow street lined with workshops. Gaslight pooled against the glass of small, crowded windows displaying locks, bolts, and chains. Holmes motioned for me to dismount before a shop whose sign read E. Pritchard, locksmith and safe mechanic. Inside, the air was thick with oil and iron filings. A short, round man in a stained apron looked up from his bench. "Evening, gentlemen? Something secure or something opened?" Holmes smiled. "Both, Mr. Pritchard. You've worked before for Sir Llewellyn Mordaunt, I think." The man frowned. "Mordaunt, aye, near a year ago. Wanted a custom cabinet, lock and pickable," he said. "Paid well for it, too. And would this be the same pattern?" Holmes drew from his pocket the small brass impression he'd taken from the study's scorched keyhole. Pritchard adjusted his spectacles, peering close. "That's my make. But this here's curious, see the groove. That's where I filed for a double ward. I made only one key to fit it, and that key can't be duplicated, not without the template." Holmes inclined his head. "Then you did not fashion a spare?" "Never. Though, come to think of it, a gentleman came round some weeks back asking questions about that very lock. Said he was in Sir Llewellyn's employ, wanted to be sure it couldn't be opened by heat or acid. I told him it couldn't." "Describe him?" Pritchard scratched his beard. "Tall, fine coat, gloves too good for the work he claimed to do. Eyes light-coloured grey, maybe blue. Spoke soft, but had a way of looking as if you'd said more than you meant." Holmes's eyes glittered. You recall his name? The locksmith shook his head. Left a card, though. Wait. He rummaged through a drawer, producing a soiled bit of pasteboard. Holmes took it, scanning the embossed name, Mr. A. Kellam, Antiquities Agent, Bloomsbury. Antiquities, Holmes murmured. Sir Llewellyn collected relics, seals, parchments, a coincidence too tidy to ignore. He slipped the card into his pocket. Mr. Pritchard, you have been of great service. One more question. Could such a key, if copied, be made hollow? Hollow? You mean like a tube? Precisely. The locksmith frowned thoughtfully. Possible, but delicate work. Would snap if turned too hard. You'd need a purpose for it. Holmes nodded. Indeed. Thank you, sir. As we stepped out into the chill air, I asked, You think this Kellam had the key made? Holmes gave a thin smile. He inquired how not to destroy the lock. That tells me he already possessed the means to do so and feared discovery. The fog swallowed our cab once more as we returned toward Baker Street. Holmes said little, though I could see his mind working behind that austere expression. At last he spoke. Watson, the phrase, "it opens nothing that exists," grows clearer. Suppose the key opened not a physical door, but a concealed compartment, a chamber of guilt or memory, something the owner wished erased. You mean Sir Llewellyn was threatened with exposure? Perhaps, or reminded of an act he hoped to forget. When we reached Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson met us with a telegram. Holmes tore it open. From Lestrade, Miss Vane. Missing since afternoon. Stop her room in disorder. Stop note found. Stop reads only. The key is found. Stop. Holmes's eyes flared. Watson or delay has cost us dearly. Within minutes we were again in the cab, the wheels spinning through fog and drizzle. As we neared Claverton Square, Holmes leaned forward, his tone urgent, yet even. Do you recall her pallor this morning? Not grief alone. She knew something, but dared not say it in the presence of her solicitor. Fielding's glance silenced her. You suspect Fielding? I suspect silence, Holmes said shortly. It speaks loudest where guilt hides. The door of the Mordaunt house opened before we reached it. Lestrade stood waiting, hat pulled low. She's gone, Holmes. The maid found her room tossed, and this— he handed Holmes a small ribbon with a broken metal ring attached. Holmes examined it beneath his lens. The tag string, he murmured, the one torn from Sir Llewellyn's wrist. Then she took the key? I asked. Or someone took her to retrieve it, Holmes answered. Where was Fielding during this discovery? Left not an hour after you, Lestrade said. Said he had business in Lincoln's Inn. Holmes turned sharply toward the cab. Then we follow him, Watson. If I read the rhythm of this affair correctly, the solicitor may soon find himself before a door. That should exist, and one we must reach before he does. The fog pressed closer around us as the horse started once more, the city's lamps flickering like dim eyes in the dark. Holmes sat motionless beside me, the broken tag turning in his fingers, a symbol of something severed, perhaps trust itself. At last he said, almost to himself, a key without a door, a lock without its master, and a woman who vanishes the moment truth draws near. It is not the key that opens nothing, Watson, it is the conscience that refuses to turn. The cab rattled on into the thick, whispering night. It is conscience that refuses to turn, Holmes murmured as the cab jolted sharply to the right, sending a thin spray of fog through the open window. The horse strained uphill toward Lincoln's Inn, where the lamplight broke faintly through the mist like gold coins tossed into smoke. Holmes was silent, his face set in that distant abstraction. I had come to recognize the interval when his mind assembled its unseen machinery. Watson, he said suddenly, when the pattern hides itself, look to the hand that drew it. Who benefits from Miss Vane's disappearance? Fielding, perhaps, I ventured. He's her solicitor. He might control her inheritance. Reasonable, though premature. But note, he also introduced the case. Criminals rarely summon their own detectives unless they miscalculate the timing. Our cab halted before the great archway of Lincoln's Inn Fields. The porter recognized Fielding's description and pointed us toward a narrow staircase within one of the older chambers. A faint light shone beneath a door halfway up. Holmes motioned for silence and turned the handle. It yielded without resistance. Inside, Fielding sat at his desk, his back toward us, a decanter half empty before him. His fingers trembled slightly as he leafed through papers. Holmes crossed the room in 2 swift steps. "Looking for this, Mr. Fielding?" The solicitor started violently. In Holmes's hand gleamed the business card we had taken from the locksmith. Kellam, antiquities agent. Fielding's colour drained. "Where did you go? I mean, yes, I've seen that name. He was a client of Sir Llewellyn's." Holmes seated himself uninvited. "Let us not dissemble, sir. You visited Claverton Square this morning under the guise of legal duty, but you left in haste before Miss Vane vanished. You have since been rifling your own papers. For what? A letter? A receipt?" The man sank into his chair. "You are mistaken, Mr. Holmes. Teckett was merely reviewing Sir Llewellyn's estate." Holmes regarded him with cool amusement. "You are far too anxious for mere accounting. I will tell you what you were searching for in the contract drawn between Sir Llewellyn and Kellam concerning a certain artifact described as the Door of Isis." Fielding's eyes darted to the drawer Holmes had not yet opened. "That contract no longer exists." "Indeed," Holmes replied softly, "because Sir Llewellyn burned it. Yet its ashes still perfume his hearth with oil of cedar." Fielding's composure faltered. "Good God, you can't mean that your client bought something he feared to own," Holmes said. "And that someone, perhaps your Mr. Kellam, sent a symbolic key to remind him of the price of concealment." The solicitor pressed a hand to his brow. Kellam was a collector, eccentric and secretive. He spoke of ancient rites, of objects that were sealed rather than opened. Sir Llewellyn entertained him for amusement until one night he returned white as chalk and demanded I destroy all records of their dealings. I refused. "The law requires the law," Holmes cut in, "is seldom the keeper of conscience." Fielding looked up sharply. "I swear to you I've done nothing unlawful. I kept a copy only to protect my firm. If Miss Vane has vanished, I know nothing of it." Holmes studied him a moment longer, then stood. "You will forgive me if I reserve judgment, but you will not leave this office tonight. Watson, be so kind as to send a note to Lestrade requesting a watch be placed upon Mr. Fielding." As I turned to obey, Holmes's gaze fell upon the mantelpiece. There, propped against a clock, lay a small photograph Miss Vane, smiling faintly. He picked it up, turning it over. On the reverse, written in a delicate feminine hand, were the words, "For the guardian of my freedom." He placed it down again, his expression unreadable. Strange dedication for a ward to her solicitor, is it not? Fielding's lips parted in protest, but Holmes silenced him with a glance. "Another question. When Sir Llewellyn died, what became of the housekeeper? The maid, gone since the inquest. She left without wages. Why?" Holmes nodded slightly. "Because she, too, served another master. I begin to perceive the outline. Kellam required a messenger, someone within the house, and perhaps Miss Vane, fearing exposure, followed him rather than risk your involvement," Fielding whispered. "Then she is alive? For now," Holmes said, "and in the company of a man who deals in relics that close rather than open. There is symbolism in her note. The key is found. Not made, not sent, but found, meaning she has discovered something long concealed. He paused, tapping the side of the decanter thoughtfully. Tell me, was there ever a safe or sealed chamber beneath the Mordaunt residence? A wine cellar, unused for years. Precisely. Holmes's tone was calm, but a spark lit in his eye. Sir Llewellyn feared that what was buried would be unearthed. Miss Vane has gone to find it. At that instant, the clock on the mantel chimed the half-hour. Holmes drew on his gloves. Watson, we return to Claverton Square. Bring Lestrade and 2 men. If I am not mistaken, our missing lady is nearer than conscience permits. Fielding rose unsteadily. If harm comes to her, Holmes stopped him at the threshold. Then you shall pray it was not by your silence. We left him there, pale and trembling in the gaslight. Outside, the fog had thinned to a drifting veil. Holmes quickened his stride, speaking half to himself. A key that opens nothing may, after all, unlock the past. And the past, my dear Watson, is the one door men bolt with the greatest care. He hailed a cab, the whistles slicing through the damp air. As we climbed in, I saw him take the photograph of Miss Vane from his pocket. He had not left it behind after all. His thumb brushed the inscription once before he returned it to his coat. The horse lurched forward toward Claverton Square, and behind us the bells of Lincoln's Inn began to follow, deliberate, like locks turning in the dark. Like locks turning in the dark, Holmes murmured as our cab rolled once more through the mist-wreathed streets. The reins creaked, the driver leaned low over the horse, impatient with the slow, heavy fog that still clung to the pavements. Holmes sat rigid, his gaze unfocused, the flicker of passing lamps catching the keen planes of his face. "Watson," he said at last, "every thread leads downward to the cellar. The maid's sudden flight, Miss Vane's disappearance, the missing key, all points not outward, but beneath. Truth often hides underfoot. Lestrade and 2 constables awaited us when we reached Claverton Square." The inspector's moustache glistened damply in the lamplight. "The servants are gone, Holmes. The house stands empty." Door locked from the inside again, as before. Holmes nodded, as if the house itself wished to keep its secrets. He took a small instrument from his pocket, worked briefly at the latch, and the door yielded with a sigh. We stepped into stillness. The air inside had a faint chill, touched by the smell of extinguished candles and something else ozone, as though lightning had once passed through stone. Holmes moved ahead without hesitation, his lantern throwing restless shadows across the stairwell. "The wine cellar lies beyond the scullery. Bring your men, Lestrade, but tread softly." We descended into darkness. The floor grew cold beneath our boots, and the plaster gave way to damp brick. At the base of the steps a narrow corridor opened into a low-roofed chamber. The lantern beam struck a door of heavy oak, banded with iron. Upon its surface were scratches, not of age, but of deliberate effort marks of metal dragged roughly across wood. Holmes ran a finger along them. Recently, within a day, the blade that made these carried oil saw the sheen. "She was here, Watson." He drew from his coat a small vial and sprinkled its contents onto the lower hinge. A faint fizz arose, followed by a soft click. "Acid for rust. Stand clear." He pressed the latch, and the door swung open with reluctant grace. Inside lay the forgotten cellar of Claverton House, a vault of stone arches and sealed niches, its air thick with the scent of earth and age. Dust filmed every surface, save one a table at the centre, upon which rested a candle burned almost to its base, and a folded cloth concealing something beneath. Holmes lifted the cloth. A key, slender, hollow, its wards finely chased, lay upon the wood. He turned it under the light. The faintest engraving shimmered along the shaft. Lux clausa, the light enclosed. Lestrade whistled. "There's your missing key. "But what in heaven's name does it open?" "Nothing," Holmes replied softly. "And yet everything. Look here." He pointed to the wall opposite, where mortar had been recently disturbed. Someone prized a brick loose. "Watson, lend me your hand." We cleared the space until a small recess appeared, large enough to hold a box. It was empty, save for a single scrap of parchment pinned inside by a rusted nail. The ink had faded almost to dust, but one phrase was legible: custodite, portum sine porta. Guard the door without a door. Holmes read it aloud, his tone thoughtful. Sir Llewellyn was haunted by allegory. The key, the message, the disappearance, all metaphors made literal. Lestrade grunted. "I prefer facts to riddles." "As do most men," Holmes said mildly. "But riddles are often the only facts permitted to speak." He examined the key again, then looked toward the stair. "Miss Vane brought it here." She uncovered what her guardian feared, some secret hidden behind propriety. Either she fled with knowledge or someone silenced her before she could share it. A faint creak echoed from above. We froze. Footsteps moved across the floor overhead, measured, unhurried, confident. Lestrade motioned his men to the stairs, but Holmes held up a hand. No shouting. Let him think for himself alone. The lantern's flame trembled as we waited. The steps descended slowly, and then a figure emerged at the turn of the staircase, drawn close, hat shadowing the face. Holmes raised the light. "Mr. Kellam, I presume?" The man halted. His features were thin, elegant, the skin too pale for one accustomed to daylight. "You have the advantage of me, sir," he said smoothly. "I was told this house stood empty." "Empty of the living, perhaps," Holmes replied, "but not of those who seek what lies buried." Kellam's eyes flicked to the table where the key glimmered. "Ah, so she found it after all." "Miss Vane?" Holmes asked. He inclined his head slightly. "A remarkable young woman. Curious minds are a dangerous inheritance." She wished to know what the symbol meant, poor child. Holmes stepped closer. "And you enlightened her?" "Enlightenment," Kellam said with a faint smile, "is seldom kind." Lestrade moved forward, hand on his revolver. "You'll come with us, sir, and tell that to the yard." But Holmes caught his sleeve. "Not yet. Let him speak." Kellam regarded the inspector coldly, then turned back to Holmes. "You think I'm a murderer or charlatan, but Sir Llewellyn sought me out. He believed he could seal away a sin as one seals a relic in stone. The key was made to remind him that no lock endures against memory." His words hung in the damp air, the candle flickering as though caught by a draught from the past itself. Holmes said quietly, "And Miss Van, where is she?" Kellam smiled faintly. "Safe from the truth, for now. Though truth has a way of finding its own door." Before anyone could move, he stepped backward into the shadows. The lantern swung wildly, light scattering across the stone vault. When it steadied, Kellam was gone, vanished as though the cellar had absorbed him whole. Lestrade swore under his breath, "There's no other exit!" Holmes knelt, tracing the damp floor. A drainage passage, narrow but sufficient for one determined to disappear. He knew the house better than any of us. He rose slowly, eyes on the hollow key. "Watson, take note, each figure in this affair hides within another. The dead man's secret, the ward's flight, the lawyer's fear are all reflections in the same dark mirror." He placed the key carefully into his pocket. "Let us leave this place, Inspector. The air here is thick with deception, and something far older." As we ascended the stairs, I glanced back once. The candle had gutted out, yet, for an instant, I thought I saw the outline of a door upon the blank wall door that had never been there. "Something far older," Holmes finished quietly as we stepped once more into the chill night. The air outside Claverton Square felt fresher, though the fog clung low, turning every lamplight into a dull aureole. Lestrade sent his men to guard the house. but Holmes waved me toward the cab. "Back to Baker Street, Watson. There's a pattern forming, and we must read it before it vanishes, like our friend Kellam." The drive was silent, save for the rhythmic creak of the wheels. Holmes sat with the air of a man rearranging pieces of an invisible chessboard. At last he spoke. Every symbol repeats the key, the inscription, the hollow phrase, "It opens nothing that exists." They are all warnings, not puzzles. Warnings of what? He didn't answer. Instead, he drew the hollow key from his pocket and turned it under the lamplight. Note the engraving again, Lux Clausa, the enclosed light. That, Watson, is no mere poetic whim. Sir Llewellyn wished to imprison something, an idea, a truth, perhaps even a person. Baker Street was quiet when we arrived, save for the faint crackle of the fire Mrs. Hudson had thoughtfully left burning. Holmes placed the key upon the table beside his microscope and sank into his armchair. "The human conscience, Watson," he said, "is the most cunning of locksmiths. It constructs its own prisons and swallows the key." Before I could reply, there came a tap at the door, timid, uncertain. Holmes gestured for me to open it. A small figure stood there in the dim hall light, a girl of about 12, with pale eyes and a smudge of soot across her cheek. She clutched her shawl as though fearing it might betray her. "You're Mr. Holmes, sir?" "I am. Come in, child. Who sent you?" "No one, sir." "Leastways, not now. I used to help in that house in Claverton Square before the lady went away." Holmes leaned forward. "You mean Miss Vane?" The girl nodded. "She said if she didn't come back, I was to tell you summat. Said you'd understand." Holmes's tone softened, but his eyes gleamed with sharp light. "Go on." "She gave me a bit of paper, sir." From the folds of her shawl she drew a creased envelope. Holmes took it, broke the seal carefully, and unfolded the contents. Inside lay a single line written in a hurried, uneven hand. "He knows the door is beneath the light." Holmes stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. "Child, did she say where she was going?" The girl shook her head, only that she had to make it right whatever it was. "She was frightened, sir. Kept looking over her shoulder like she heard someone walking that wasn't there." Holmes slipped a coin into her hand and sent her on her way with instructions to tell no one she had been. When the door closed, he stood motionless at the hearth. The door beneath the light. A riddle, and one Kellam may already have been solved. I asked, could it mean the cellar again? No, that door we have seen, this speaks of something still hidden. He moved suddenly to the writing table, drew a city map from his files, and traced a line from Claverton Square to Bloomsbury. The antiquities agent's address lies near the old chapel of St. Baruch. Its crypt, if rumour serves, was sealed when the new gas conduits were laid light above, darkness below. The door beneath the light. I saw the quick tightening of his jaw. Watson, our phantom antiquarian, may be more than a blackmailer. He is a man who trades in symbols and secrecy. If Miss Vane has gone there, she may yet be in peril. Before I could protest the lateness of the hour, Holmes was already at the door, cloak swirling behind him like the shadow of his own thoughts. The fog had thickened again by the time we reached Bloomsbury. The gas lamps hissed softly above the deserted square, throwing a faint shimmer on the wet stones. Holmes moved with uncanny certainty, his lantern hooded, his steps soundless. "This way," he whispered. "There is the chapel wall. Note how the pavement dips toward the base. The ground has shifted since the conduits were laid. An entry lies beneath." He knelt and began probing the flagstones. One lifted slightly at his touch, revealing a rusted ring set into the earth. With effort, We raised a small trapdoor, releasing a gust of cold air tinged with the scent of stone and damp parchment. Holmes lowered the lantern into the darkness. Steps, narrow but passable. After you, Watson, our quarry, goes to the underworld tonight. The descent was steep and uneven. At the bottom lay a corridor of carved stone, leading toward a low arch. Faint light flickered ahead, a candle's moving. Holmes extinguished our lantern and advanced silently until we could see into the chamber beyond. Miss Isabel Vane stood within, her face pale but resolute, holding a small book bound in dark leather. Across from her, half in shadow, was Kellam. He was speaking in a low but intense voice. "You see now, my dear, why he feared it. This record, this confession would have destroyed him, but you need not fear. I can keep it safe as I kept him safe once before." Holmes's hand touched my arm in warning. "Not yet," he breathed. Miss Vane shook her head. "You don't wish to keep it safe, you wish to own it. My guardian's shame was your fortune." Kellam stepped closer. "And yours too, if you choose wisely." She drew back, clutching the book to her chest. "No, I will take it to the police." He smiled faintly. "Then we shall both vanish." At that moment, Holmes stepped forward, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Not quite, Mr. Kellam." The antiquarian spun, eyes wide, but Holmes was already between him and the girl. "The game ends here." Kellam's gaze flicked toward the hollow key at Holmes's belt. "You found it. Then you know it opens more than you think." His hand darted to his coat. Holmes caught his wrist. The two men struggled in near silence until Lestrade's voice echoed from the stair, and Kellam, seeing no escape, let the object fall, a small glass vial that shattered against the stones, releasing a hiss of acrid smoke. Holmes pulled Miss Vane aside as the vapour spread. By the time it cleared, Kellam had gone through some unseen passage in the wall. Lestrade arrived breathless. "You've lost him again." "Not lost," Holmes said. He stooped, picked up the dark book and brushed the dust from its cover. He left the truth behind. He turned to Miss Vane, whose trembling hands reached instinctively for the volume. "Not yet, my dear lady. Some doors must be opened in daylight." Holmes looked up at the carvings that circled the archwings. Eyes, keys, all intertwined in a motif of light imprisoned by stone. "Appearances," he murmured, "are the cleverest masks, but the lock is weakening." The echo of their footsteps faded up the stair, leaving the cellar still save for one thing, the faint metallic click that seemed to answer each of Holmes's steps, as though somewhere in the dark another key was turning itself once more. Another key was turning itself once more. I heard Holmes murmur as we emerged from the crypt into the pale breath of dawn. The first grey light slanted weakly over Bloomsbury's rooftops, dissolving what remained of the fog. Miss Vane leaned heavily on my arm, her face white and drawn, while Holmes strode ahead with the dark book pressed close beneath his coat. Lestrade followed, muttering, "That Kellam fellow's made of smoke, Holmes. Vanishes every time a man blinks." "Smoke often marks the place of fire," Inspector Holmes said quietly, "and we have just seen the ashes of something that once burned too brightly." He hailed a cab and ushered Miss Vane inside. "Baker Street, Watson. There are truths best faced by firelight and reason." The ride passed in uneasy silence. Miss Vane sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the passing streets as though London itself were a dream she could no longer trust. I saw Holmes studying her reflection in the glass, not unkindly, but with that detached intensity he reserved for the final pieces of a puzzle. Once home, he drew the curtains tight and set the book upon his desk. The tea cover was bound in black calfskin, its edges worn to grey. He regarded it for a long moment and then spoke as if to himself. "A confession or a covenant both demand a witness." He looked up. "Watson, if you will act in that capacity?" "Gladly," I said. taking my chair beside him. Holmes opened the book with the same care one might give a relic. Inside, the ink was brown with age, yet the hand that penned it was firm. The first page bore a date nearly 20 years past, followed by a name, Llewellyn Mordaunt. Miss Vane made a faint sound, half gasp, half sigh. Holmes raised his eyes to her. "You knew he kept this?" She shook her head. "He told me there were things in his past no light should touch." Holmes' gaze softened slightly. He spoke with more accuracy than he knew. He turned a page. The writing was steady, confessional, stripped of ornament. "I, Llewellyn Mordaunt, do set down the truth of my sin, not to seek absolution, but to bury it beneath the name of charity." A few lines later, Holmes's brows drew together. He speaks of an expedition to Cairo, of an object recovered from a tomb's fragment of the door of Isis. "Another relic?" I asked. "More likely, a piece of superstition gilded as scholarship," Holmes replied. Yet the description sealed light contained in darkness matches the engraving on our key. He believed he had unearthed a relic that held divine judgment. Note how quickly belief turns to fear. Lestrade, who had been pacing near the window, grunted. "And that Kelham chap, was he part of it?" Holmes scanned further. R.A.K. appears here. Mordaunt writes that his companion insisted on selling the relic to private collectors. Mordaunt refused and smuggled it back to England under false papers. He shut the book abruptly. "Gentlemen, I believe we stand before the shadow of a crime older than the law permits us to name." This was not blackmail in the ordinary sense. It was a reckoning long deferred. Miss Vane spoke then, her voice low. "He used to lock himself in that study for hours. I thought it was grief over my parents, whom he lost at sea. But perhaps it was this secret following him across the years." Holmes's eyes glinted. "You speak of your parents, Miss Vane. Were they acquainted with Sir Llewellyn before their deaths?" She nodded. "My father was his partner in the same expedition. He never returned." Holmes leaned back slowly. "Then your inheritance was guilt, not gold, the ward of a man who buried her father's memory beneath his own shame." Lestrade made an impatient sound. "That's philosophy, not police work. We've got a murderer loose." "On the contrary," Holmes said sharply, "we have 2 victims, and the murderer may yet count himself among them." He closed the book and stood. "This must go to Scotland Yard for safekeeping, though I doubt the law will comprehend half of it. Kelham will try again. His interest in this volume is personal. He believes it grants him power over those who shared in Mordaunt's deceit." Miss Vane clasped her hands. "Then I am in danger?" Holmes regarded her gravely. "You were from the moment you read the phrase, 'It opens nothing that exists.' It was a warning not to touch the past. Yet you did, with admirable courage." He took the key from his pocket and placed it beside the book. Light enclosed, truth imprisoned. 2 halves of one story. A sudden rap sounded at the door. Lestrade moved first, revolver half-drawn, but Holmes gestured for calm. "No danger, I think. The pattern completes itself too elegantly for coincidence." Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram on a tray. Holmes broke the seal and read aloud from Fielding. "Have received strange visitor claiming to be agent of police. Stop requesting immediate meeting. Stop brings note in your hand. Stop come at once. Stop." Holmes folded the message. "Watson, the trap has been baited, and with my own handwriting, no less. Only one man could mimic it with such nerve. Kelham." "Precisely. He seeks to retrieve what he failed to secure tonight." Miss Vane rose. "You mustn't go alone." "Fear not," Holmes said lightly, though his eyes betrayed tension. "The hunter often learns most from the snare he allows to close." He turned to Lestrade. "Have 2 men follow us at a distance. No interference until I signal. Signal? You will hear the sound of a key striking stone, then act swiftly. Holmes drew on his coat, tucking both the key and the manuscript inside. As we left the room, he paused briefly at the threshold. Watson, when deception wraps itself in the garments of virtue, the only light worth trusting is the one hidden within shadow. We followed him down the steps into the half-light of morning. The street lamps were fading, but one remained lit outside the chemist's across the way, a single globe burning against the grey. Holmes glanced at it thoughtfully, then murmured, "Beneath the light indeed." The door closed behind us, and Baker Street fell silent save for the soft, rhythmic tick of the mantel clock echoing faintly, like the heart of a mystery that had not yet finished beating. "Beneath the light indeed," Holmes repeated as we turned into the mist-blurred streets. Dawn had not yet broken fully. London existed in that half-hour where night lingers resentfully behind the gas lamps. Holmes moved swiftly, his long stride purposeful, but silent, the tension in him so contained it hummed like a wire under strain. We reached Lincoln's Inn in less than 20 minutes. The gate stood half open, and a solitary figure waited beneath the arch-fielding, pale, coat-button to the throat, his nervous glances darting toward every passing shadow. Holmes approached without greeting. "You received the telegram, Mr. Fielding?" "Yes, Mr. Holmes. A man presented himself an hour ago, uniform, warrant, the manner of authority. Said you had sent him." He hesitated. "He carried a note that seemed in your hand. I was to give him the Mordaunt papers." "And did you?" Holmes's voice was low, almost kind. Fielding swallowed. "Not at first. I demanded proof. He laughed and said you would be here within the hour to confirm it." Holmes's expression hardened. "Describe him. Average height, fair hair, a scar near the left temple, his accent educated but foreign, faintly continental." Holmes's lips curved in a brief grim smile. "Our Mr. Kellam again for his double." "And the papers?" "Still in my possession. I locked them in the safe when I began to doubt." "Good," Holmes said. "Then you have saved more than your client's fortune. You may have preserved your own." He turned abruptly. "Watson, stay with Fielding. I'll inspect that safe." The impostor may have tampered already. We followed him through the echoing corridor to the solicitor's office. The gas lamps hissed faintly against the damp air. Fielding unlocked the door with trembling hands. Inside, the air was heavy with the faint metallic tang of oil and odour Holmes noticed instantly. "Someone has been here." Fielding gasped. "Impossible! I left at once after telegraphing you." Holmes crouched beside the safe, examining the lock with his magnifier. Fresh scoring on the ward's acid residue. He attempted it, but failed. Curious, he straightened. "Watson, observing the floor, the dust is disturbed only near the window. Our visitor entered that way, not by the door. The sash hung open by a fraction." Holmes stepped to it, fingers tracing the sill. Gloves with roughened palms, climber's habit. He descended to the court below, seeing the smudge from boot grease. Fielding's voice quavered. "Then he'll return." "Doubtless," Holmes murmured. He failed to secure the papers, but he achieved his goal. Holmes paced once across the room, then halted before the hearth. "Mr. Fielding, when did you last correspond with Sir Llewellyn?" "About a week before his death. He sent a brief note asking me to alter his will. He intended to leave everything to Miss Vane outright." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Ah, and did you comply?" "I drafted it, yes, but he never signed." "The old will remain, naming certain charitable trusts." "Trusts administered by you?" Holmes asked lightly. Fielding's eyes flickered. "Naturally, as executor." "Indeed." Holmes's tone was almost genial. A tidy arrangement had the old gentleman lived to confirm it. The solicitor's indignation flared. "You suggest dishonour? "I suggest convenience," Holmes said evenly. "A virtue not uncommon among men of law." The silence stretched until Lestrade's men, stationed outside, knocked to announce the perimeter secure. Holmes nodded curtly and turned back to Fielding. "We shall accompany you when you open that safe. No movement unless I instruct it." Fielding crossed to the wall panel, touched a hidden catch, and revealed the small iron door. He inserted his key, but before he could turn it, Holmes seized his wrist. "Wait!" He knelt, holding the lantern low. A thin wire glinted across the edge of the frame. "Ingenious," he muttered. "The lock is trapped." "Trapped?" I asked. "Connected to a small explosive charge, likely mercury fulminate. Kellam's courtesy to his double. Open it, and you lose more than documents." Fielding reeled back, white as chalk. Good Lord. Holmes worked swiftly, cutting the filament with his penknife and drawing out a tiny capsule from the recess. He held it up. "Our friend's methods grow desperate. He wishes to destroy evidence, not steal it." He opened the safe himself. Inside lay several bundles of papers and a small black case bound with ribbon. Holmes removed it carefully and untied the knot. Within were 2 letters, both bearing Sir Llewellyn's seal. He read them silently, then passed one to me. It was addressed to Fielding, dated the day before the death. "If the man Kellam returns, give him nothing. He will ask for what he already owns, but it was never his. The key must remain with the sin it locks." Holmes exhaled slowly. "The other is to Miss Vane," he said. "Nearly identical except for one addition." He glanced up at Fielding. "It reads, 'Trust the man who stands beneath the light.'" Fielding frowned. "A metaphor again, perhaps, or perhaps an instruction." She read it literally and found the chapel in Bloomsbury. Holmes replaced the letters and shut the safe. "Kellam is not finished. He fears this correspondence as much as the manuscript. We shall set a watch here tonight." Lestrade nodded, signalling his men. Holmes turned toward the window, studying the pale haze beyond. "There is another door, Watson, not of oak or iron, but of conscience. Kellam opened it long ago, and Mordaunt tried to seal it. We must discover what passed through before it closes again." He faced Fielding suddenly. "You will remain in your chambers. Speak to no one, open to no one. Should another inspector appear, offer him my compliments and nothing else." Fielding managed a weak nod. "I will obey, Mr. Holmes." Holmes extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into semi-darkness. "Good. Let us see if the hunter returns for his bait." We waited in silence, the city's distant rumble muted beneath the thick fog. Time passed like the slow ticking of an unseen clock. Then faintly from the courtyard below came the scrape of a boot against stone. Holmes motioned for quiet. Another sound followed, a soft clink of metal, unmistakable. "The key again," Holmes whispered. "Listen, Watson. The game turns its own wards." He moved to the window, eyes gleaming in the half-light. "He's come back." "He's come back," Holmes whispered, his profile a sharp silhouette against the faint gleam of the gaslight beyond the pane. The sound from the courtyard grew clearer, the crunch of grit, then a low rasp of metal against stone, rhythmic and deliberate. Lestrade's men stirred, but Holmes gestured them down with one gloved hand. "No blundering," he mouthed. "Let him think of the house asleep." For several heartbeats, the only sound was that faint metallic rhythm like the slow turning of a key in an unseen lock. Then a hand appeared upon the sill, pale, long-fingered, and gloved in grey kid. It rested there a moment, as though listening for danger. Then a second hand followed, gripping the ledge, and the faint outline of a man's shoulders emerged from the fog. Holmes moved noiselessly toward the wall. The window stood barely ajar. He raised his cane fractionally, weighted then in one motion, flung it wide and seized the intruder's wrist. A cry half human, half hiss escaped the man outside. He struggled, but Holmes held fast. "Lestrade!" The inspector and his constables sprang forward. A flurry of limbs, glass and fog ensued. When the chaos settled, the figure was inside, tall, lean, with eyes so pale they seemed almost luminous in the gloom. It was indeed Kellam. "Gently," Holmes said as the officers pinned him. "We wouldn't want another vanishing act before we've heard the performance." Kellam gave a thin, cold smile. "You were quicker than I hoped, Mr. Holmes, but perhaps too quick. The truth, when forced, becomes fiction." Holmes regarded him coolly. "Truth resists fiction as light resists shadow, though I begin to suspect, Mr. Kellam, that you thrive in both." Lestrade shoved the man toward the desk. "Enough riddles. You broke in here for those papers. Say it plain." "I broke in," Kellam said softly, "to prevent a greater theft, the theft of a dead man's peace." His gaze flicked toward Fielding, who stood trembling near the door. "He knows what Mordaunt did, though he pretends to forget." Fielding's voice rose, brittle with fear. "I know nothing of the sort." Holmes stepped between them, his tone calm but edged. "On the contrary, Mr. Fielding, you know precisely what haunts this affair. Sir Llewellyn's sin was not theft of relics, but of names. You forged those charitable trusts, did you not? The proceeds of a false foundation." Fielding's mouth opened, then closed again, no sound emerging. Holmes continued relentlessly. Kellam assisted him. "Between you laundered stolen antiquities through benevolent societies, but when remorse came, when Sir Llewellyn sought to undo the deception, you found yourself in peril." The old man threatened to confess. "That's a lie," Fielding cried. Holmes turned to him sharply. "Then why was he dead before the confession could be sent?" The silence that followed was like the held breath before a verdict. Kellam's expression did not change, but a flicker passed through his eyes. "You're clever, Holmes, but not omniscient. The key, the book, and the inscriptions were Mordaunt's symbols, not mine. He built his own prison. I merely guarded the door." Holmes smiled faintly. "Guarded, yes, but from which side?" "You were his accomplice, then his tormentor. You sent the key to Miss Vane to flush out the one person who might still hold proof of your dealings. But she outwitted you, and she found the relic first." Kellam said nothing. The faint twitch of his jaw betrayed only disdain. Holmes took the hollow key from his pocket and held it up. The light caught the engraving, throwing the Latin words into brief gold fire. "Lux clausa," the enclosed. Light. "Tell me, Kellam, what truth did you fear this would unlock?" Kellam's gaze fixed upon it as if mesmerized. "It opens nothing that exists," he murmured. That was his inscription. "Because what it once opened no longer exists in the mind of a guilty man." "And yet," Holmes said softly, "guilt can be more real than stone." For the first time, the antiquarian faltered. "You think this is about money? About deceit in trade? You are wrong. It was faith, Holmes' faith misplaced. Mordaunt thought he could command the past, reshape it through ritual and secrecy. I warned him, I warned them all." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Warned whom?" But Kellam's mouth had tightened again. "You'll see soon enough. The past does not rest merely because you close the book." Lestrade barked an order, and his men clamped irons on the man's wrists. Holmes watched in silence, thoughtful, almost melancholy. When the door closed behind them, Fielding sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I swear, Mr. Holmes, I had no part in murder. I wanted only to protect my reputation and hers." Holmes turned sharply. "Miss Vane?" "She is innocent," Fielding said quickly. "But Sir Llewellyn once hinted that her father had not died by accident in Egypt, that something darker happened there." If that came to light, Holmes's voice was very low, then the sins of one generation would destroy the next. Yes, the chain grows clearer. He went to the window, staring into the thinning fog. Watson, every element returns to its origin. The relic in the tomb, the contract in the safe, the girl in the crypt are all reflections of the same design. Appearances concealing truth. Then Kellam's words, "The past does not rest," refer to Mordaunt's guilt? I asked. More than that, Holmes said. They suggest an inheritance, a moral infection passed down through those who profited from his silence. And Miss Vane stands at its centre, unknowing yet endangered by what others concealed. He drew a long breath. "Fielding, you will remain under guard until morning. Lestrade will see to it. Watson and I have one call yet to make before this night ends." "Where?" I asked. "To Claverton Square once more. The door beneath the light has been found but not yet opened. I must know what lies behind it before Kellam's words prove prophecy." He turned down the gas lamp until its flame glowed like the eye of a dying coal. The room dimmed to shadow, and his face, half-lit, looked carved from thought itself. "The key, Watson, is not meant for a lock," he said softly. "It is meant for revelation." He pocketed it again, and without another word, led the way out into the paling dawn. The fog was almost gone now, leaving London cold, bare, and waiting as though some vast truth had drawn back its veil and was holding its breath before speaking. Holding its breath before speaking, I thought, as Holmes and I walked swiftly through the thinning fog toward Claverton Square. The dawn had hardened to a pale, reluctant light, and the city's hum was beginning to stir. Yet all felt unnaturally still, like a stage before the final act. Holmes moved with fierce economy, his coat drawn close, his hand brushing the pocket where the hollow key lay. "Watson," he said without turning, "the truth waits within that house, but remember, truth rarely appears as a villain or saint. It is most often a ghost wearing both faces." We found Lestrade's constable still posted before the gate. Holmes dismissed him with a nod and entered without pause. The interior was as we had left it, the air faintly metallic, the curtains half drawn, the shadows familiar but somehow altered, as though the house itself had shifted in our absence. Holmes lit his lantern. "We go below," he said. "Whatever Sir Llewellyn buried, conscience demands an audience." The stair groaned beneath our steps. The cellar door remained ajar, the air beyond it still damp and cold. As we descended, Holmes's light fell once more upon the stone vault and the table where the candle had burned down to its stub. But this time something new awaited us. A trail of footprints, small, delicate, crossed the dust. "Miss Vane," Holmes murmured. At the far end of the chamber stood the figure itself, Isabel Vane, motionless, facing the wall. The lantern light caught her profile pale, strained, her hand pressed to the cold stone. Holmes advanced quietly. "Miss Vane, you should not have returned." She turned, eyes wide, but strangely calm. "I had to, Mr. Holmes. He said that the light must be freed." "Kellam?" She nodded. "He came after you left the yard. He found me at my lodgings. He said Sir Llewellyn's spirit could not rest until the truth was known. I followed him here, but he vanished again." Holmes's voice dropped to a whisper. "And what truth did he promise?" She hesitated, glancing toward the wall she had been touching. "He said there was another chamber behind this one, that it held what my father died for." Holmes approached the wall, running his hand over the mortar. "The pattern of the bricks differs here. See, these 3 courses are newer. Lestrade must have missed it. He produced a small chisel and began probing at the seam. The brick loosened with surprising ease. Behind it yawned a narrow recess. Holmes reached in and drew out a small wooden box, no larger than a prayer book. It was sealed with a band of tarnished brass, the same metal as the key. Holmes regarded it silently, then inserted the hollow shaft. It fitted perfectly. For a moment he hesitated, as though half unwilling to turn it. Then, slowly, the mechanism clicked. The lid rose with a sigh like breath released after years of confinement. Inside lay two objects, a fragment of yellowed parchment and a small pendant of beaten gold shaped like a sun eclipsed by shadow. Holmes lifted the parchment. Its edges were scorched, its centre inscribed in an archaic hand. The sin was not in the finding, but in the hiding. Let the light be sealed, that none may mistake it for virtue. He read it aloud, his tone grave. So this is the relic, a symbol, nothing more. Mordaunt's confession transmuted into ritual. He sought to bury his guilt, not the object itself. Miss Vane whispered. Then my father? Holmes looked at her gently. He died for conscience, not greed. He discovered the fraud, and your guardian silenced him under the guise of tragedy. Her breath caught. You mean Sir Llewellyn murdered him? Holmes replaced the parchment. By omission, perhaps. Some crimes require only silence. I stepped closer. But Kellam his role? Holmes's gaze darkened. The keeper of another man's guilt. He profited from it, then mistook it for his own redemption. Men like Kellam confuse control with absolution. That makes them dangerous. A sound interrupted the faint scrape of movement from the stair above. Holmes stiffened, lantern raised. Too soon for Lestrade. Stay back, both of you. The steps came again, deliberate, descending. Then a voice, calm, assured. You were always too curious, Mr. Holmes. Kellam emerged from the shadows, pale and spectral in the lantern glow, a pistol steady in his hand. Put the box down. Holmes did not move. You have played your part to perfection, Mr. Kellam, but the curtain is closing. Perhaps, Kellam said, but not before I reclaim what was stolen. His eyes flicked toward Miss Vane. The sins of the fathers should not fall upon the children. I told you that, did I not? She shrank back, and the pistol shifted slightly toward her. Holmes's voice was quiet, but edged like steel. You mistake penance for possession. That relic will damn you as surely as it damned him. Kellam smiled faintly. Damnation is only another kind of truth. At that moment, Holmes flicked his wrist. The lantern shattered against the wall, plunging the chamber into darkness. A single flash cracked through Kellam's shot. The echo boomed against the stone, then silence. I lunged forward blindly. When the light returned, Holmes had produced another lamp from his pocket. Kellam was gone. The box lay open, the key missing. Watson, Holmes called sharply. The side tunnel he's escaping. We ran, but the passage twisted and narrowed, ending in an old drain where the morning light seeped faintly through the grating above. The iron bars were bent outward, wet footprints leading into the street beyond. Holmes halted, breathing hard. He will run to the ground soon, but not before the key serves its final purpose. Miss Vane's voice trembled behind us. What purpose? Holmes looked up toward the weak daylight filtering through the grate. To unlock the one door that still remains his own reckoning. He replaced his hat, his expression unreadable. Come, Watson, this chase ends not in darkness, but in daylight, and daylight, as you know, reveals more than it forgives. As we emerged once more into Claverton Square, the morning sun finally broke through the mist, striking the windows of the dead man's house until they shone like sheets of fire. Holmes paused, his eyes narrowing at the reflection. The light beneath the door, he said quietly. It was never beneath it. The words hung in the air like prophecy as the sound of distant footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the reveals More than it forgives, Holmes had said, and indeed the first rays of daylight that filtered through the London haze were mercilessly clear. They turned the damp cobblestones of Claverton Square into a mirror of pale gold, where even the faintest footprints were visible. Holmes moved with measured precision, tracing the impressions Kellam had left in the grime. "He went east," he murmured, "toward the river." Desperation always runs to water. Lestrade and his men, summoned by messenger, arrived within minutes. The inspector was flushed from haste and annoyance. "The devil's led us a dance, Holmes. You say he's armed?" "Armed, yes, but not dangerous in the way you imagine," Holmes replied. "The pistol was his illusion of control. His true weapon lies in what he believes the key can open." We followed the trail through the awakening streets, down narrow lanes where milk carts rattled and street sweepers turned to stare, then toward the wharves where the smell of tar and fog hung heavy in the air. The river was slate-grey and restless, and the mist there clung thicker, as if reluctant to release what it had taken. Holmes stopped before an abandoned warehouse near the water's edge. "This, Watson, is our final chamber." Lestrade frowned. "How do you know he's here?" Holmes knelt, touching the damp threshold, because the dust within is newly disturbed, and because guilt, like water, seeks the lowest level. He pushed the door open. The hinges protested softly. Inside, faint light filtered through the cracked roof, falling upon stacks of decaying crates and a scatter of papers drifting like pale leaves. At the center of the floor stood Kellam. He was unarmed now, his back to us, the hollow key gleaming faintly in his hand. "You are persistent, Mr. Holmes," he said without turning. "But then, conscience always is." Holmes advanced slowly, his tone calm. "Conscience, sir, does not flee from the light." Kellam's shoulders lifted in a quiet, weary sigh. "You think I run?" "No, I came here to finish what should have been done years ago. The relic, the confession, the guilt must all end where it began." Holmes's gaze flicked to the floor, where a small wooden box, the same that had once contained the parchment, now lay open beside a single brass lantern. Inside, the parchment itself had been torn to shreds. "You destroyed it," Holmes said softly. Kellam nodded. "Words can wound the dead as cruelly as the living. He wanted absolution, but he never earned it. Mordaunt killed his friend, Miss Vane's father in Egypt, not from greed, but fear. The man had discovered the falsity of their expedition, that the relic was a forgery meant to enrich them both. In panic, Mordaunt sealed the tomb and left him there. A hush fell over the room. Even Lestrade, so often impatient, stood silent. Kellam went on, voice steadier now, as if confession itself lent him strength. "I helped him hide the crime. In return, he funded my collection. But he grew ill with guilt, and when he tried to destroy the evidence, I kept one piece of the parchment. I thought I could control the secret, hold it as a lesson. Instead, it consumed us all." Holmes's expression was grave, but not unkind. "And the key?" Kellam turned it slowly between his fingers. "A symbol, nothing more. He fashioned it himself to remind him that repentance cannot undo what is done. It opened no door, because the only lock was within him." Holmes stepped closer. "Then why send it to Miss Vane?" For the first time, Kellam's composure faltered. "Because she deserved to know. She was innocent of his sin, yet chained to its shadow. I thought to frighten her into forgetting to bury the truth before it destroyed her, as it did him. But she is stronger than either of us. She sought knowledge instead of escape." Holmes studied him, eyes unreadable. "You wished to protect her, yet nearly condemned her. Such is the vanity of those who think themselves custodians of truth." Kellam gave a bitter laugh. "You sound like a priest, Holmes." "No," Holmes said quietly. "Only an observer, and I observe that you no longer wish to live in a world where truth breathes." Kellam's hand trembled. Perhaps not. Before anyone could move, he cast the key into the river through a gap in the broken wall. The faint splash seemed to close a circle of years. Then he turned toward Lestrade and raised his hands. "Do what you must. The door is open now." It was over. The constables took him without struggle. Holmes watched in silence as they led him away, his face unreadable in the grey light. "When they were gone," I asked softly, "you knew, didn't you, that Sir Llewellyn killed her father?" "I suspected," Holmes said. "The abrasions on his wrist were self-inflicted. A man who carries guilt too long invents his own punishment. Mordaunt's death was not murder by another's hand, but by conscience, what the law would call natural causes." "And Miss Vane?" He looked toward the river where the ripples had already erased all signs of the key. "She must live with the truth, as we all must, but I think she will live." That evening, Miss Isabel Vane called upon Baker Street. Her face was calmer, though the sorrow had not left it. Holmes received her with rare gentleness. "I owe you both more than I can say," she began. "Inspector Lestrade told me Mr. Kellam will stand trial, yet I find no joy in it." "Justice seldom brings joy," Holmes replied. "It brings balance, which is colder but more enduring." She hesitated. "I keep thinking of my guardian, not as he was found, but as he lived. Was there no good in him?" "There was remorse," Holmes said. "And remorse, Miss Vane, is the seed of good that grows too late." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she smiled faintly. "Then perhaps that is enough?" Holmes inclined his head, the faintest echo of courtesy. "Enough to close one door, perhaps, though not all doors should be closed." When she had gone, the silence in the room deepened. Holmes sat at his desk, gazing into the fire. The hollow key, retrieved by the river police, now lay drying upon the mantellet's brass dull, the inscription Lux Clausa barely visible. After a long while, he said, "Watson, have you ever considered that every man carries a key such as this, fashioned not for locks but for secrets?" "I have," I said quietly, "but few of us attempted to use it." He smiled without mirth. "That, my dear fellow, is why the world remains habitable." He reached for his violin and drew the bow across the strings, letting a low, meditative note fill the air. It was not a melody, but a thought rendered in sound, something unresolved yet strangely peaceful. Outside, the last of the daylight faded. I remember watching the faint gleam upon the key, how it caught the glow of the fire and returned it dimly, as if unwilling to surrender its mystery entirely. Holmes ceased playing and set the violin aside. "There is a curious symmetry in it all, Watson, the man who built a prison for his conscience, the woman who sought to open it, and the shadow who mistook himself for its guardian. Each pursued light, and each was blinded by his own reflection." He rose, pulling the curtains against the encroaching dark. "Come, let us have tea. I find that philosophy is better served hot." Later, when I recorded the case for my notes, I could not help but reflect on the strange moral texture of it all. There had been no treasure to recover, no villain in the common sense, only human beings entangled in their own illusions. Sir Llewellyn Mordaunt had hidden a lie until it killed him. Fielding had hidden fear until it corrupted him. Kellam had hidden truth until it consumed him. And Holmes alone had dared to look behind the door that was never locked. Even now I recall his final words that night as he stood by the window, looking into the rain. "Men bury what they cannot forgive in others, and what they most fear to find in themselves." As I closed my notebook, the fire burned low, and for a fleeting instant the reflection of the key upon the mantel looked almost alive, glowing faintly, like the heart of something still waiting to be understood, a square fading, but not gone.